Okay, so, well, first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Soutsos and the HI-EURECA-PRO project, as well as to the organizers, and of course, from my university to Dr. Fernandez and also to Oliver Torres for allowing me to be here today. And although I'm an art historian, my intervention today is going to focus on the idea of cultural heritage as a social construct and why it is important to preserve it, especially for the sustainability of heritage communities. But in this regard, I would also like to reflect on until what extent our efforts have achieved the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. So, first of all, I would like to share more or less my table of contents, since I would like to reflect on the concepts both of cultural heritage and sustainability, since more or less the end of the 20th century, in order to question ourselves, wonder what's the relation between sustainability and heritage conservation, and how this relation deals with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. To show my reflections in this regard, I would like also to share some case studies, 4 case studies, in which Spain and especially Leon, for example, are involved. So, as I said, the very first, I try to make a brief introduction, is regarding what's cultural heritage, what do we understand as cultural heritage nowadays, because it's not the same concept as many years ago. So, for example, regarding the definition by UNESCO in the convention in Mexico in the 80s, cultural heritage of a people encompasses the works of its artists, architects, musicians, writers, and scholars, as well as anonymous creations born from the popular soul, and the set of values. And values is one of the key concepts in my intervention that give meaning to life. That is both tangible and intangible works. We know, all of us know this, that express creativity of that people, which means language, rituals, beliefs, historic sites, monuments, literature, works of arts, archives, and of course, libraries. In the case of we Spaniards, we call cultural heritage patrimonio, which is a word that comes from Latin. And the meaning was pater monere, which in Roman law meant a set of family assets to be transmitted. So when we speak English, as now, we have also the idea of the custody. The heir is the custody, and this concept had an almost sacred dimension. It's the same as in English, as I was saying, heir, inheritance, heritage. So we receive a legacy, and we have not the right, but we are compelled, we must transmit this legacy to the future generations. However, we have to know, we have to be aware of the fact that cultural heritage is a subjective and dynamic concept. Each generation redefines the conceptual boundaries of a heritage object. And this issue makes us to be aware of how we evolve, how we change as time goes by, and what's heritage for the different generations. This is also due to the fact that heritage, as everybody knows as well, is a social construct. Our contemporary meaning, in fact, comes from the French Revolution, so we are talking about the 18th century, and the concept has a history, but not a huge history, because, as I said, it changes and evolves over time. Also, it is a key element for our collective memory. It should be a shared resource accessible to everybody, to a universal public, for their enjoyment, and that's the reason why we should preserve it, enhance it, and transmit it, but not also for the enjoyment. It's also because it gives us a sense of identity. It has a social dimension, and it's an element that makes us to feel a sense of belonging, to feel as a part of a community. And that's the reason why, as I said before, we are compelled to preserve that heritage, those values, as an element of social cohesion, which leads, as I'm going to explain or even try to later, that leads to social and sustainable development. The concept itself was dealt with in the World Commission on Environment and Development, which was also called the Brundtland Commission, established precisely by the United Nations in 1987 and chaired by the Swedish expert Gro Harlem Brundtland. The result of that commission was the report named Our Common Future, also the Brundtland Report, and there was the place where we could find the definition of sustainable development. As you can see in your screens, this definition was focused mainly in environmental and ecological issues. However, that was the first step to reflect on how sustainable development also dealt with and deals with cultural heritage in the following decades and even in the 21st century. Some of the most important recommendations of the Brundtland Report, which are also interesting for us in dealing with cultural heritage and sustainable development, are these three on screen. First of all, reorient the previous ideas of economic development to conform a new perspective focused on achieving equitable economic growth from an ecological standpoint. Second, sustainable development must be applied not only to economic management, but also to technological advancement and the stewardship of natural resources. And this topic has been discussed in the prior conferences. And third, and last, the renewal of societal objectives towards a shift in attitude characterized by a greater respect for ecosystems, biodiversity, the environment, and natural resources. Today, we would say also greater respect for social issues, communities, diversity, multiculturality, etc. We do this today thanks to different authors like Mehdi Ghafouri, who in 1988 argued that heritage assets are inseparable and fundamental in the planning of sustainable development policies. And why did he state this? Because he thought that considering the cultural dimension, particularly the conservation and enhancement of cultural heritage, is essential for local sustainable development. And why? Because the sense of belonging, which leads to the creation and the sharing of a cultural identity, are concepts as well for development. I mean, if we ourselves understand ourselves again as a community, we can try to develop our context in different terms, in different or from different perspectives. So, given these concepts and the definition and at some point the evolution of these concepts, how can we relate sustainability and cultural heritage? As it has been said in prior conferences, heritage conservation is the set of operations and techniques aim to prolonging the lifespan of cultural assets. In this sense, there are two approaches, as we know: preventing deterioration and repairing the damage. Both, in most of the cases, try to maintain not only the physical, but also the cultural properties of material objects. However, if we think about societal issues regarding the preservation of cultural heritage, we have also to keep in mind the concept of safeguarding, which refers to the measures and actions that have the aim to ensure the viability and ongoing transmission of living cultural expressions. Nowadays, even we art historians deal not only with the material part of cultural heritage elements, but also try to get a wider knowledge about the immaterial, the intangible values regarding those elements to preserve them in a holistic way. In this sense, we really care about the concept of authenticity. Why? Because, as I said before, cultural heritage is one of the ways memory is embodied. So preserving the authenticity means preserving that memory. So we have to deal with the conservation, restoration interventions, but also with the safeguarding policies. Why? Because especially in the situations, war situations we deal with nowadays, keeping our memory for future generations and keeping it in an authentic way is really important. So, taking into account that heritage values evolve, change, and at some point they can even be manipulated, we have to be really careful while dealing with authenticity. For example, in the case of we art historians, authenticity is a fundamental criterion for interpreting a cultural asset and also for establishing the appropriate guidelines for its preservation, conservation, and transmission through that interpretation. So we have to be really cautious because most of the times the poor management or the inadequate interventions can destroy this authenticity. For example, in the first conference, Dr. Soutsos talked about the problems with tourism, and sometimes that's a really important problem. It's a key problem. Why? Because authenticity and original anthropological and social value sometimes are simplified or frozen, both its internal and external image. And sometimes that happens because we want to show to tourists the idea they have in their minds, not the reality of our community. So that keeps our reality away from transformation, away from what we can call hybridization. So in this case, we have to be, as I said, aware of this danger, and we should try to avoid those stereotypes, those spectacularizations of cultural identities in terms of tourism, as I said before. Why? Because if we leave our traditions, our costumes evolve, if we allow them to evolve, we could get to that process of hybridization. As you can see on screen, this process enables multiculturalism to move beyond segregational tendencies and evolve to interculturality. And heritage, cultural heritage, from its different manifestations, perspectives, the culture it belongs, etc., allows us as well to understand the world in a more intercultural way. So, as the Spanish author Garcia says, we can choose to live in a state of war or in a state of hybridization, and cultural heritage allows us to do so. In this sense, how sustainability and heritage conservation relate. First of all, in terms of economic development, cultural heritage, as all of us know, constitutes a capitalizable asset, which means using its inherent value, it can generate long-term socioeconomic benefits. We have also been dealing with this topic during the conferences. As well, it can also offer employment opportunities and supporting small and medium-sized enterprises, which allows the economic development in, for example, small rural areas, which could be something really important for example, as Spaniards, because many places in Spain are quite empty in terms of inhabitants. Also, as I was trying to explain, the preservation and promotion of heritage can enhance social cohesion and community identity, and that reinforces the resilience and sustainability of local development strategies. So, recognizing heritage as a capitalizable, as I said, element can make that policymakers and stakeholders integrate into their broader frameworks of sustainable development, ensuring that economic growth for those communities. In addition, as I was saying, cultural heritage contributes also to the memory and the identity for the heritage communities. The shared histories, values, practices, etc., allow the creation of that collective identity and reinforces the transmission of cultural knowledge across generations. It also promotes social inclusion, as I will try to show with one of the cases studies, and of course, cultural heritage and cultural elements are those elements that ensure the preservation not only of the material part, but also of the immaterial, the intangible values important for not only for the mankind, for the human beings, but also for smaller communities. Of course, in many other conferences, this topic has also been approached, but we need to reuse in most of the times buildings which are monuments, which are categorized as monuments, and sometimes reusing that elements assure or ensure the efficiency and the reduction of environmental impact. However, I'm not going to deal with this topic, but I completely agree with Dr. Burbo in the sense that sometimes it's quite difficult due to the laws, to the restrictions of law, to deal with this topic in an appropriate way. However, some authors say that this is a key point for the rehabilitation, the reusing of especially architectural heritage. Because, as you can see on screen, it is supposed to minimize the demand for new construction materials and energy-intensive processes. So, as I was trying to explain, the sustainable conservation of material heritage is supposed to support a circular use of resources, ensuring that cultural assets are safeguarded for future generations without compromising environmental integrity. So, taking all of these concepts in mind, how can the preservation of cultural heritage, deal with or relate to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? First of all, we've been talking about the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And I would try to reflect on till what extent we have achieved these goals or have been trying to achieve these goals, because it has been a decade since all the United Nations member states adopted this 2030 agenda. As everybody knows, we have 17 sustainable development goals, and some of them are, for example, ending poverty and improve health and education, reduce inequality, and support economic growth. So this is the table of contents, the table of the Sustainable Development Goals we all know. And of course, I think it's also important to highlight the work and the key role the Division for Sustainable Development Goals in the United Nations play to try to help all the member states to get to achieve those goals. So, as I was saying, first of all, how cultural heritage relate to these sustainable development goals by the United Nations. First of all, and maybe it could sound strange when it comes from an art historian, but the third goal, good health and well-being, is also related, for example, with a cultural heritage element which is protected in León, here where my university is. And the image, the picture you can see on screen is about the Leonese, the fight from León, which is a sport, a traditional sport, which has been protected during the last years. It was protected by law in the 21st century, but it's a tradition that has been kept during generations, and its enhancement has been something which has worried our institutions. So that's the reason why even in our university, we also have exhibitions in order to make awareness about the importance, not only about cultural heritage, but also about sport and our health and well-being. Of course, as all of us know, quality education is directly linked to cultural heritage because it allows us to give not only a historical point of view or an artistic approach about our heritage, but also a cultural point of view. And that allows our students to develop especially critical thinking, which is something really important for us nowadays. Cultural heritage is also very important to achieve the goal of gender equality. And for example, we can use cultural heritage as an education tool, for example, to make the social community in the widest of the ways of speaking, conscious about the importance of women during history. For example, the photograph on screen right now, it's about Hikaye, which has been also included in the list of intangible heritage, and it regards the ways women in Palestine tell stories, tales, and traditions to the family, for example. So as a key element in the social family relations, for example, in this case in Palestine. Also, cultural heritage, as I said before, creates or can create decent work and offer opportunities for an economic growth, not only at a huge scale, but also at a local scale. So, as I said, it's interesting for small or medium-sized enterprises, maybe also for self-employment in these cases. Also, as it was explained before, it also helps us to deal with innovation, technical or technological innovation, which is also very linked to cultural heritage. And please let me make an important call about the photograph you can find in the middle, which is an impression, a three-dimension impression, which can be used. I mean, the innovation and the technology can be used as well to interpret our cultural heritage and reduce inequalities, as long as it allows everybody, even those with some sight problems, to approach cultural assets. And finally, it also, of course, regards the 11th goal, the sustainable cities and communities. And in this case, I would like to highlight the opportunity I had last year to be the tutor of the girl you can see in the photograph below on the right, which was an undergraduate student that developed a cultural project regarding heritage in her local village. It's a very few populated, low populated, village. And during summer, she developed a cultural project with kids, with people from the village who came after the summer holidays, and it was a really successful project. She's been asked to keep on doing it because it attracts people and it lets the villagers to promote their history, their cultural heritage, and all their values as well. And finally, cultural heritage, especially that intangible part, also allows us to keep a good life on land regarding the 15th goal. And of course, I remind the concept of hybridization. If we live in a multicultural world, maybe comprehension, maybe peace, justice, and strong institutions could be possible. So just to end, I would like to show some strategies which have been developed for the last years, and some examples of how can we try to be more sustainable by the enhancement of cultural heritage. For example, the cultural roots of the Council of Europe program is one of the most interesting approaches since an art historian's point of view, but it's also specified they maintain an awareness and a strong belief in sustainability and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. In this case, well, we have now 49 cultural roots declared, and most of them deal with all those elements I read in the cultural heritage definition by UNESCO. So we don't only have roots regarding material cultural heritage, also immaterial cultural heritage, and those of them are quite very, very, very diverse. In the case of Spain, and specifically in the case of León, which is here highlighted in the map, the cultural root of the St. James Way is one of the most important, as it shows intercultural meetings and the discovery of traditions, languages, art, architecture. I mean, it's one of the most relevant roots for us as Spaniards. And especially, as I said, in León is also very important because it helps to the economic growth, but also it helps to the social growth. For example, as you can see in this headline, more than 7,000 pilgrims came to León last year, and this figure is increasing. That's the reason why we also held conferences about tourism and self-employment here in León regarding St. James Way. Also, other routes are important. For example, the route regarding our Andalusi legacy, this could be very useful to respect the multiculturality here in Spain. We are dealing now with some migration issues from our politicians. So maybe this kind of approaches should be more wider known here in Spain to get to that hybridization, as I said before. Of course, the European root of US heritage also could help to respect or to a greater respect of diversity, of cultural diversity in our territories. And to end my presentation, I would also like to talk very briefly about the last element, Spanish element, which was included in the list of intangible heritage by UNESCO last year, which is the Asturian cider culture. And I decided to include this because I'm from Asturias. I work in León, I work down in here, but I'm from here. And as an Asturian, I was quite worried many years ago because I thought, or I was afraid of our traditional drink, beverage, disappeared because there were less and less producers, there were less and less waiters, which are specialized in the way the cider is poured, because technology in the last years had replaced those specialized waiters and waitresses, of course. And this changed also the way people from Asturias interact with each other when they drink this beverage. However, the fact of having been included in the list of intangible heritage not only prevents the industry of disappearing, but also prevents the change of the way we interact with each other while we are in our leisure time drinking some cider. So just my conclusion is that cultural heritage plays a vital role in promoting social progress, as it's the foundation for memory, identity, and that sense of belonging. It strengthens community cohesion, fosters intercultural dialogue, and supports inclusive, resilient societies. So it helps to build, to construct a social, sustainable community. It also provides economic growth and, of course, as I said before, with some things, more considerations, apart from other considerations. The reuse and the adaptive management of heritage assets can also help us to preserve our resources. And finally, my last conclusion is that recognizing the interdependence of all these elements is essential for achieving the sustainable development goals in a truly holistic and culturally informed manner. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your attention, for the help, and of course, thank you very much for the audience who is still in here in spite of the long morning. Thank you.